Richness comes from what you love. Being in love with your profession makes you an excerpt. Well, the son of a manufacturer, now a name almost everyone is aware of. You guessed it right. Welcome back to Business Bang, you all. Today we think we should talk about the name behind the brand, Christian Dior. Are you excited? So let's get started. But before that, do not forget to hit the bell icon and subscribe to the channel. Christian Dior, the French couturier, was born in Granville, France. Dior, a descendant of a Norman bourgeois manufacturing family, spent his early youth in the affluent surroundings of the family villa, Rhumbs, located on the Channel shore near Granville, which today houses a museum devoted to his legacy. The little harbor was known at the time as a fashionable seaside resort, and in the summer it was turned into an attractive Paris suburb. In 1911, the family relocated to Paris, to the new bourgeois district of Passy, near the Bois de Boulogne. After completing his baccalaureate, Dior enrolled in the School of Political Science in Paris, as per his father's desires. He was a keen observer of Parisian cultural movements, meeting several writers, artists, and musicians, including Pierre Gaxol, Maurice Sache, Jean Auzin, and his cousin Christian Berard, Max Jacob, and Henri Sauget. Following his military duty and with the backing of his father, he launched an art gallery at 34 Rue de la Boucherie in 1927. Because his parents declined to put their names on a commercial sign, the business was named after his buddy, Jacques Mongin. Contemporary painters included Giorgio de Chirico, Maurice Utrillo, Salvador Dali, Raoul Dufy, Maury Laurencin, Fernand Léger, Jean Lursac, Pablo Picasso, Asip Sadkin, George Braque, and Aristide Maillot. Christian Dior's carefree upbringing was cut short when his brother was institutionalized in 1931. His mother died and his father was bankrupt. In the face of this avalanche of tragedy, Dior responded with a flight to the east. He was naively propelled by a frantic quest for a fresh solution to problems that this capitalist crisis had made poignant, embarking on a research trip to the Soviet Union with a group of architects, only to return to discover that his companion had also been wrecked. His destitute family fled Paris, first to Normandy and then to the town of Callion, near Cannes. Dior stayed in Paris, closing his initial exhibition and eventually joining Pierre Cole's gallery on the Avenue Cambacérès. As a result, he progressed from losses to forced sales while continuing to stage surrealist or abstract exhibits that drove away the remaining art aficionados. In 1934, he had TB, and his friends raised funds to send him to treatment. He found himself in Paris the next year with no money and no place to live. He survived on the sale of one of his last canvases, Raoul Stuffi Le Plan de Paris, which the designer Paul Poirier had sold to Dior when he was in similar financial straits. Costume and couture. Jean Auzin, a couture house designer, introduced Dior to the fashion world and his clientele. Dior committed himself to fashion sketching at the age of 30, referring exclusively to what he understood and liked about Edouard Molyneux, Coco Chanel, Elsa Schiaparelli, and Jean Lanvin. He was able to sell his initial sketches, which were of headgear and later of gowns. His customers included trendy hat makers and couture businesses, but he also offered concepts to international consumers. His initial public notoriety came through the publication of his drawings in Le Figaro. In 1937, couturier Robert Piquet chose 4 of his creations and commissioned them for his half collection. Christian Dior was only 32 years old at the time, and he described these as the first garments that I truly designed. In June of 1938, Robert Piquet offered him a position as a designer in his couture workshop on the Champs-Élysées Rond Point. He developed 3 collections in a succession there. The second volume comprised his first broad gowns, which were inspired by the clothes worn by young heroines in French Second Empire children's literature, Les Petites Filles models. They were distinguished by a raised breast, circular breadth beginning at the waist, English needlework petticoat. He was presented to Carmel Snow, editor of Harper's Bazaar, as the developer of a popular design named English Coffee. In 1939, his final pre-war collection for Piquet debuted a line of what became known as amphora dresses, which marked the beginning of rounded hips. Dior made theater costumes for particular clients in addition to his profession as a designer. He dressed the actress Odette Jouet in Jean Blanchon's Captain Smith at the Theatre des Mathurin in December of 1939, and Richard Sheridan's The School for Scandal at the same theatre in February of 1940. Dior was mobilized at the onset of the war in 1939 and later joined his family in France's unoccupied zone following the 1940 armistice. Piguet, who was still in Paris, urged him to resume his pre-war post, but Dior was late in responding and discovered that Antonio del Castillo had already accepted the role in the fall of 1941. Dior then joined Lucien Lelong's team, along with another young designer, Pierre Balmain. Throughout the war, the two shared design responsibilities. Balmain and I never forgot that Lelong taught us our vocation amid the toughest limitations, Dior stated. Throughout the German occupation of France, Lucien Lelong, the astute president of the Chambre Syndicate de la Couture Parisienne, had a profound impact on the future couturier. Dior acquired an interest in overseas markets and high-end ready-to-wear during his research trip to the US in 1935 and the debut of his Edition brand. In contrast, he thought fashion was appalling under the German occupation and shouted, "With what vindictive delight did I do the contrary later?" Following the liberation, Dior's colleague Pierre Balmain established his own couture company on Rue François later in 1945 and pushed Dior to do the same. The artistic leadership of the Gaston enterprise, previously known as Philippe et Gaston, on the street Saint-Florentin, was offered to Dior by Marcel Boussac, a famous French textile producer and president of the Cotton Marketing Syndicate. Dior proposed that he open a couture firm where everything would be fresh, from the state of mind and the staff to the furnishings and the premises. Since international markets, following the long stasis of fashion due to the war, were certain to require truly new trends, Marcel Boussac contributed 60 million francs to the project. Dior Fashion House. Dior picked a private home at 30 Avenue Montaigne as a location for his enterprise, which was founded on October 8th of 1946. The company employed 4 models and 85 people, 60 of whom were seamstresses. In addition to the head couturier, the management team included a financial director, a studio head, a head of workshops, an artistic advisor, and a head of high fashion design. The couture house itself has 2 dress workshops and 1 suit workshop, whose head was Pierre Cardin, then 20 years old. It also had a shop on the ground level from the start, offering non-fitting products and accessories. Victor Grimpier designed the salons and stores in white and pearl gray tones, and they were outfitted in neo-Louis XVI style. Dior, since an amazing rumor was emerging that the financial backing of Marcel Boussac, the French king of cotton, would enable him to build his own house, wrote the New York Times. Even before it was shown, Dior's debut collection generated headlines, and he gained the endorsement of Vogue, Le Figaro, and Elle editors. Christian Dior, the newbie among couture houses, finally exhibited his debut collection for the spring of 1947 after the winter presentations. As a debut photo for the new look, it quickly brought the couturier renown at the age of 42. "The first season was wonderful, even above my expectations," he remarked. The second, in which the couturier took the famed new look trend to its logical conclusion, was a breathtaking triumph, accompanied by the release of his debut perfume, Miss Dior. With this drive, Dior spent the final 10 years of his life creating his couture company and expanding his global fashion impact. In 1947, Dior got the Neiman Marcus Award for his debut collection. He realized during his journey to the US that if I wanted to target the enormous number of exquisite American ladies, I had to start a luxury ready-to-wear boutique in New York. The next year, he established the Christian Dior New York Inc. subsidiary at 745 Fifth Avenue. In Caracas in 1953, Christian Dior Venezuela. In London in 1954, Christian Dior Ltd. And subsequently in Australia, Chile, Mexico, and Cuba. He repeated the procedure. These businesses offered custom-made fashions from Paris as well as accessories. However, it was not until 1967 that a true ready-to-wear brand, Miss Dior, was released. The Christian Dior Perfume Company was founded in 1948, and the second scent, Diorama, was released in 1949, followed by Eau Fraiche in 1953 and Diorissimo in 1956. The first lipsticks were released in 1955. In 1951, Dior launched the Christian Dior Delman firm, which manufactured shoes designed by Roger Vivier. Lastly, in 1954, the Paris shop introduced the gifts and tableware section. The Dior Labels product line was expanded owing to a highly clever licensing program. the first of which was given in 1949. By this method, the mark was applied to all female clothing accessories, from the girdle to jewelry, but also, and very early on, to unique goods, such as Christian Dior ties in 1950. A basic and successful public relations approach aided the house's growth. No direct advertising, but excellent ties with the press, which ensured high awareness for the styles as well as their designer, who was featured on the cover of Time on March 4th of 1957. The couturier gave numerous interviews, created disguises for memorable parties, and continued to dress stars as Marlene Dietrich in Alfred Hitchcock's Stage Fright in 1950. Henry Koster's No Highway in the Sky in 1951, and Ava Gardner in Mark Robson's The Little Hut in 1956. Dior detailed his career in Christian Dior et Moi in 1956, which was littered with Parisian superstars, mishaps, coups de theater, and palm readers' forecasts. In passing, he reassured the reader about the reasons for his long-ago journey to the Soviet Union and stressed his respect for the business spirit, therefore contributing to the contradictory myth of the scandal generator with a comforting face. The anticipation followed by the announcement of a fresh big alteration increased the focus on the collections each year, affecting notably the length of skirts. The couturier himself released detailed communiques, which were usually peremptory in tone, such as no yellow, no hats with clean and fitted design, lending way to the new fashion trend. The collections, each featuring around 200 pieces, unveiled in succession opposing lines that force on fashion a never-before-seen velocity of change. Corol and 8 in 1947. Also known as the New Look collection, Zigzag and Envol in 1948, followed by Ailey in 1948, Trompe l'Oeil and Millie the Cycle in 1949, and Milieu the Siècle in 1949, Vertical and Oblique in 1951, Oval or Naturel and Long in 1951, Sinueux and Profilé in 1952, Tulip and Vivante in 1953, Muguet and H in 1954, A and Y in 1955, and FL in 1957. Influences of the Belle Epoque on the New Look. Despite their distinct lines, his designs were always linked by the consistency of certain traits. The dresses were designed to sculpt the form, following prescribed lines. The body was always extremely stylized, whether it was the new look, the shock look, or the flat look. The waist had been shifted, tightened, or unbelted. The hips expanded or shrank as a result of the materials used to portray the couturier's active and tense patterns in shapes: shantung, Ottoman silk, thick taffetas and satins, velvet, organza, woolen fabric, and cotton piqué largely replaced the traditional usage of flowing woolen and silk crepes. Christian Dior, the creator of a style that made extensive use of material, artifacts, and decorations, encouraged the establishment of a variety of parallel businesses, including corset manufacturers, feather producers, embroiderers, costume jewelry makers, flower designers, and illustrators. Thus, the picture of Christian Dior's works incorporates Roger Vivier's shoes, Brossing de Mer's prints, Brevet's tools, Rebay, and George Barbier's fabrics, Francis Winter's gems, and René Gro's sketches. Furs and caps were produced at the fashion house's specialist studios. Dior's works were typically defined stylistically by decorations derived straight from pre-1914 fashion. Simulated knots, false pockets, ornate buttons, play with cuffs, collars, basques, tails, false beds, and bias cuts peppered his collections, and from the start, eliminated any modernist ambitions. Dior didn't say where he got his aesthetic cues from. He specifically declared only oblique intentions to describe the basis for his new look. I have a conservative disposition, which is sometimes misconstrued as being backwards. We had just emerged from a starved, frugal age concerned with tickets and textile rationing. As a result, my fantasy inevitably assumed the shape of a reaction to poverty. As a result, we should search for an unambiguous statement of his historical inspiration in the framework of the presentation of his exhibitions. The couturier stated that he was attempting to prepare a cradle in the style and colors of Paris's childhood, and described this neo-Louis XVI, white paneling, lacquered white furniture, gray hangings, glass doors with small beveled panes, bronze wall lamps, and small lampshades that ruled from 1900 to 1914 in the new houses of Passy. He showed a crystal chandelier and a proliferation of palms, a hanging of joy cloth, in the spirit of idea shops of the 18th century, on the recommendation of Christian Berard. Parallel to this nostalgic neo Louis XVI style, a real prestige, Christian Dior seems to derive the material artifice of his pleated, draped, corseted, and adorned effects from the Belle Epoque clothing lexicon throughout his career. I thank God I lived in Paris during the later years of the Belle Epoque. Whatever life has granted me since then, nothing will ever be able to equal the sweet memory of those days, he wrote. But by choosing his favorite period, one in which taste was eclectic, the designer avoided the domination of a single style to free himself to adopt all possible reinterpretations of the past. Neither the structural artifices nor the proliferation of appliqued ornaments interfered with the readability of the line. Paradoxically, Dior's creations were attracted primarily through their sobriety. As evidence of an eclectic sensibility, the ornamental resources derived from turn-of-the-century fashion were effectively deployed with a concern for modernity hostile to the composite. The conception of each model seemed to be guided only by an emphasis on a single effect at a time. From one model to the next, one's attention was shifted, for example, from the emphasis of a cut to the shimmering of a pattern or the luxuriance of the embroidery. The directed gaze, channeled by the erasure of the superfluous by the notorious choice of uniform and subdued colors when the cut was to be emphasized, or, on the contrary, the choice of a simple cut to emphasize the fabric, guaranteed the visual impact of each model and pointed up its strong identity. It thus was beyond the individual model, and only in the course of the show, that the succession of appearances enabled the presentation of an aesthetic of the whole, both composite and romantic. The constancy of stylistic borrowings from the past revealed a veritable postmodernist stance on the part of this man who was so admirably ensconced in his century. As Dior himself said, "It is strange that in 1956, people applied the names avant-garde and aesthetic of the future to the works and the masters that we had admired between the ages of 15 and 20, and who had already been famous for 10 years, amongst the most aware of our elders, guided by Guillaume Apollinaire." But for Dior, the new at all costs, even to create the absurd, is no longer the essential area of exploration. Far from the aspirations of pre-war surrealism, he confided the origin of his first collections, after so many years of wandering, where, with consorting with only painters and poets, couture wished to return to the fold and rediscover its original function, which is to adorn women and to beautify them. As a result, his haute couture, while remaining a privilege of the wealthy, appeared comprehensible to everyone. Christian Dior thereby gave his signature to the first democratization of taste, if not of fashion. By confirming the feminine silhouette to design, by dictating the choice of accessories and the circumstances appropriate for every outfit, the couturier left little room for personal expression, risk, and feminine fantasy. On the other hand, the steadiness of his total look guaranteed his popularity. It enabled him to satisfy an enormous public who saw in Christian Dior, whatever their national or individual clothing cultures, the label of guaranteed elegance. In the end, Dior's conception of wearable fashion was also that of exportable fashion. Christian Dior was, in succession, an avant-garde amateur, an artisan of a kind of return to order, and finally, a manufacturer of elegance. The first superstar couturier died of a heart attack at the age of 52. The financier, Marcel Boussac, thought at the time of closing the house, but in the face of pressure from license holders, he appointed the young assistant, Yves Saint Laurent, as artistic director, and in this way, the label survived its founder. When Yves Saint Laurent left in 1960, Marc Bohan took his place and held it until Gianfranco Ferré took over in 1989. Their designs upheld the image of couture distant from the multiple challenges and manifestos of contemporary fashion. The classicism of Christian Dior was not shaken until the arrival in 1997 of John Galliano, who revived the active media exposure established by Dior himself. Well, that's all about it for today. Thank you for watching. Did you like the video? If yes, don't forget to hit the like button and share it with your friends. And yes, the most important thing is to subscribe to our channel for more videos like this one.